Okay. We are we are live. Okay. Okay. Well, let us good evening everyone. Glad you could join us. We are live and we're looking a little different tonight because the engineering architect Mike Carson has got us together tonight, and we are happy about it. So looking forward to those of you who are able to join with us tonight. And good evening, Trish. Good to see you. And we are going to proceed. Uh, we are going to proceed. So if you don't mind, join me in a word of prayer. Eternal God, thank you for this night. Thank you for those who have gathered and are gathering. We thank you for your word. We thank you for your presence, and we thank you for your guidance. Now, Lord, we pray for understanding and clarity and wisdom in incorporating your word so that it will be a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Good evening, Jackie. I see you. I see you. And we are looking at, for tonight, Mark, the 12th chapter. Mark, the 12th chapter. We're going to start with Mark, the 12th chapter, verses 41 through 44. We're going to start with Mark, the 12th chapter, and we're going to look at, in particular, verses 41 through 44. Now, our objective is to move into Mark, the 13th chapter, verses 1 through 8, and that the majority of that will be for next week, but we're going to set it up tonight. So we're starting with Mark 12, verses 41 through 44, with the objective of moving into Mark, the 13th chapter. Hey, Joycelyn, good to see you. Good to see you tonight. Amen. So tonight, again, Mark 12, and we're going to focus tonight on the 41st through the 44th verses. I'm going to be reading from the NIV translation of that Greek New Testament, and it reads at verse 41, Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." Let me read that again. Let me read it again. Verse 41 of Mark 12. Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." So that's where we're starting out. Again, we are moving to get into Mark 13, but to get into Mark 13, we have to start with Mark 12, this last part of Mark, the 12th chapter. Again, the 41st through the 44th verses. And so I want to, first of all, say that this particular scripture has been used so many times to illustrate faithful giving, that the poor widow gave more than the wealthy, rich people who were going around peeling off of skimming off of the top of their money. And this poor widow has given more than all of them. And so the text has been used to illustrate faithful giving. Giving, as you have heard, until it hurts. Faithful giving, giving all she had. And they gave out of their wealth. She gave out of her poverty. But I want to change the way we have seen this, because actually this is not a commendation from Jesus. It is more of a condemnation from Jesus concerning this widow giving all she had to live on. It is not a commendation. It is, in fact, a condemnation. And so what is the condemnation? Certainly, it is not the widow. It is not a poor widow giving. What is the condemnation then? The condemnation is, what kind of religious institution would allow a poor widow? Now, first of all, her husband has died. And in first century Palestine, for a woman to have her husband dead, and it doesn't say, but we can assume that she doesn't have any sons. Because of the patriarchal nature of the first century, if she did not have a husband to protect her, then she was vulnerable in this society. And then you add on that she's poor. So she's and when the scripture says poor, she's destitute. She's barely is eking out a living. And so here we have a woman who has already been traumatized because her husband has died, which has left her extremely vulnerable in a patriarchal society that did not value women as equal to men. And so women in this age would need a man's name, a man's presence, even if it was sons, to be a protector of them. Otherwise, she's vulnerable. So then we add on that she's poor, that she is destitute. And so, what kind of religious institution would allow, would coerce, would set up a system that required that this poor woman would be pushed by the standards of the society to believe that she had to give all she had. That, in fact, is a challenge, you all. Good evening, Jeanette. I see you. Saul Boda. That is a challenge to us. This is not a commendation of faithful giving. This is, in fact, is a condemnation. Notice that it says Jesus sat down in a spot where he could really see what was going on. He positioned himself right across from where people were doing the giving. And as he observed, he saw wealthy people who were not giving faithfully, but they were skimming off the top. They were giving out of their wealth. In other words, you know, if they had $1 million, they were giving a couple of $100, okay? In other words, they weren't giving in a way that reflected they had a relationship with God. Their mouths said they had a relationship with God, which is why they were in the temple in the first place. But the way they were giving was a show. It was for superficial reasons only, and so they weren't giving in a way that reflected a relationship. Now, this woman is trying to demonstrate a relationship in a system that would allow her, if Jesus knew she was a poor widow, then other people in the temple, in that particular, in fact, this is the court of the women. So this woman was not even allowed to go even further to where the men could go. She could only go as far as in the temple there was a place called the court of the women, and there was another outer court where people who were not Jewish people could come, and then there was a place closer to the inside where men could come, and then you have the Holy of Holies and whatnot where the priest and high priest could go. So it was segregated. It was separated in a way that reflected one's class rather than one's relationship with God. And so this poor woman, if Jesus knew that she was a poor widow, then other people in the temple knew that she was a poor widow. And so what kind of religious institution would allow this poor woman to give not just some of what she had, because she didn't have much, she was destitute. She had 2 little small coins. These were the smallest coins of currency that one could have. Now, this is all she had to live on. So she gives that. Now, what does she have to live on? What does she have to buy food? What does she have to take care of herself? She already didn't have enough, and now she has given in the temple treasury all she has. Now she has nothing else to live on. What kind of religious institution would allow that, you all? And I will say to you, a religious institution that preys, P-R-E-Y-S, preys on people and takes care of people. That's the kind of religious institution. And so Jesus, in effect, when he called his disciples to him, and he points out that she gave more than everybody else, he was pointing out that she was led to believe that her giving reflected her relationship with God, and wanting to be faithful because of what the scribes, the Pharisees, the priests had taught and had drilled into her that your giving reflects your relationship. Well, she's poor, so she then gives out of her heart, yes. But no religious institution should allow somebody who doesn't have enough to live on to give all they have. Now, this is what the text is getting at here. This is what Jesus is raising up. I know that we have looked at this text and we have talked about this text in sermons and in Bible classes as it is an example. Hey, Reverend Kim and Reverend Dixon, I know we have talked about this in terms of, hey, good brother Solomon, we have talked about this text in terms of being a faithful giver, and it has been used to try to encourage people to give faithfully, to give from their heart. And we should do that. But there are people among us, there are people in our community who are destitute. And so what happens when a person gives everything they have and now they have nothing left to live on? What happens to that person? What you don't hear in the text is that this religious institution of the temple, that it then got resources to respond to this widow, to take care of her, to provide her with her needed resources, whether it was food and clothes and a place to live, that they then got engaged to take care of him. No, you don't hear that because that's not what happened in this religious institution. This religious institution only took from the woman and did not take care of the woman. And so it encouraged her to give all she had, but it did not take care of her after she had nothing left. And to Jesus, that's a problem. For Jesus, that is an issue that deserves condemnation. And so this text should not be looked at anymore as a text that is used as an illustration of faithful giving. It should be used as, but the way that it is intended, that is a condemnation of any institution, especially religious institution, that would allow a destitute widow to give all she had and then doesn't take care of her. It doesn't respond in a way that will allow her to have food, to have clothes, to have a place to live, to have some dignity, to have some resources for her to be able to take care of herself. Now, I know that's a little bit difficult because we are used to looking at these texts, in a way that lifts up the high spiritual, in particular of giving, and I understand that, but we have to look at the text in context, because if you look at, I skipped over intentionally verses 38 through 40, because I want you to see that when we pull a text out of its context and use it to make a point, then actually it becomes a con on people. And so we don't ever want to do that. And I know all of us at some point have been guilty of this, in particular with this text, myself included, until I began to study a little deeper. And I want to say, I've mentioned this book before. I mentioned the author before, Ched Myers, biblical scholar, who wrote a very magnificent book, Binding the Strong Man is the title of the book. And the whole book is on the Gospel of Mark. The whole book is on the Gospel of Mark. And so in Binding the Strong Man, Ched Myers, and I'm extrapolating this lesson tonight from Ched Myers' presentation and analysis of this text. And if you don't have Binding the Strong Man by Ched Myers, it is an important book for you to have in your library to study, in particular when you read the Gospel of Mark. And so I intentionally skipped over verses 38 through 40 because it helps to keep this particular pericope text of Scripture in context. This is what it says, starting with verse 38. It says, as he taught, Jesus said, watch out for the teachers of the law, the scribes. They like to walk around in flowing robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and have the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. Here it is, verse 40. They devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely. Now let me read that again for you so that you'll get that. Verse 38 through 40. Jesus said, watch out for the scribes, the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and have the most important seats in the synagogue and the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely. Now, that is the context now. Rarely when we use the other part, 41 through 44, and talk about the need for faithful giving, do we look at it in context to what Jesus said. Now, remember last week I told you that when the retelling of the episodes of Jesus are told, they are not necessarily told in chronological order. The events are not necessarily in chronological order. But Mark then places the events so it will lift up Jesus' teachings, because oftentimes when Jesus said things, people didn't get it right off the bat because he said it. And so oftentimes there's an illustration that goes with it so that we can understand what Jesus was getting at, the deeper spiritual meaning. And so when Jesus said, watch out for the scribe, the teachers of the law, they like to walk around in flowing robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and have the most important seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. That don't always go over as far as how deep it is. So then right after that, then we have the episode where Mark says Jesus went into the temple. And he went into the place of the treasury, and the place of the treasury had these 13 trumpet-shaped chests. There were 13 offerings that people were told they had to give. There were 13 large trumpet-shaped chests that were lined up around the walls, and people had to give in all of those. And so Jesus set up a seat where he could observe the giving here. And that's what comes right after his words where he said, watch out for the scribes. Watch out for those teachers of the law. They devour widows' houses. What kind of religious person is seen as devouring a widow's house? A widow, again, one of the most vulnerable, if not the most vulnerable other than children in that particular society, and it's about the same today. A widow, what kind of religious person is set about to hornswaggle and just literally take the only thing that a vulnerable person has for roof and shelter, take their house and what they have to live on? That is an unscrupulous person. And Jesus said, those people, hey there, Lori. Hey, Mike, you on there too, huh? Those kind of people, Jesus said, will be punished most severely. And then that's where we have then the episode where Jesus observes the giving of the wealthy in the temple. And then we see that he does not commend what has gone on, but he actually condemns what he sees going on. He doesn't commend what he sees going on. Hey, angel, he is condemning what he is watching as it is transpiring before him. So this is not a text that we ought to use anymore to inspire people to give, because it is not, wasn't set to do that. So Jesus condemns the religious system. Now, I need to say that we have a lot of people today who talk about religion and how religion is, how religion hurts people and stuff like that. We have a lot of people today who want to jump on the bandwagon and talk about church and how the church is not this and what it should be, et cetera, et cetera. And we have a lot of people who will, if not openly, they will quietly not want to give, not want to tithe or things like that. They don't want to ascribe to doing that. Now, I want to say that Jesus is not condemning those things. Religion, hear me now, religion has never done anything to anybody. Religion is like a phone, it's like an iPad, it's like a pen or pencil, it's like a piece of paper. It doesn't do anything to anybody. It's what people do with it that creates the problem. Religion has never done anything to anybody. It's how people practice that religion. It's how people use that religion, either against people or to build people up. And so Jesus is condemning a particular system that was set up here in Jerusalem in the temple by scribes, by Pharisees, by teachers of the law. Scribes and teachers of the law are basically the same thing. By the religious elite. There is a system that was set up by them that was in cahoots and in conjunction with the Roman Empire that enabled them or encouraged them to then be thieves to profit off of people. And so Jesus condemns the system that was set up in this temple that had, first of all, conditioned this woman who had nothing to think that she had to give everything she had and then have nothing to live on afterwards. He, first of all, condemns the system that would teach, that would condition, that would make this woman believe that this is what she had to do, when in reality the people that were giving all the large amounts weren't giving from their heart. It was a show. And so Jesus positioned himself to watch this, and it was an illustration of what he had said about the scribes and the teachers of the law. The rich, the wealthy threw in large amounts because their wealth allowed them to do that, but they did not give their fair share. Now let me juxtapose that with how we are dealing or facing challenges today. We know that billionaires right now pay less taxes than somebody who works at the lowest job you can think of, some service industry, whether it's McDonald's or Burger King, or some retail store somewhere. Billionaires pay less taxes than any of these people. Why? Because there were tax loopholes set up so that the wealthy people would not have, an income that could be taxed, but they have wealth that they could draw from. And so, in effect, we see wealthy people, who give great and large amounts. Some of them give a large amount so people can go to college. So you hear some of even black wealthy people, I don't need to name them. You know them, whether it's Tyler Perry or Oprah Winfrey or whoever. They give millions of dollars, to some of the HBCUs and so for students to go to school and things like that. And that's commendable. In a sense, that's commendable because somebody is going to benefit from it. But guess what? They pay less taxes than you. So they can afford to do that because it's a tax break, right? In other words, their giving is not so much to help. Their giving is to offer, a show so that, people don't begin to jump down their throats about them enjoying the wealth that they got from people in the first place. So we live in a time that is set up to favor wealthy people. Now, that is the society we live in, and unfortunately, there are religious people that will reflect more of the society than a relationship with Jesus Christ. So a relationship with Jesus Christ would say, it's not a sin to be wealthy, but we need to use whatever our resources are to then empower those who have nothing, who the society has marginalized, to give them stable income and not just a periodic handout, but to, in fact, not only give, but change the way the society is ordered so that people won't find themselves in these desperate and destitute situations in the first place. So the Latin American Bishop Dom Helder Camara once asked, and you've heard me say this before, he says, if I feed a few hungry people, they call me a saint. But if I ask why are there hungry people in the first place, then I'm an enemy of the state. Okay, because the society that we live in is set up to benefit people that are wealthy. This society is a reflection in many ways of the society that Jesus was in, and the religious institution of the temple was the center of Jewish society. So the center of that society, there was only one temple. Now there were other places that other people worshiped at. We see that when Jesus visits the well, Jacob's well, and the woman comes at noon to draw water from it, and they get into the discussion, and she says, you Jews say that we ought to worship in Jerusalem when my people have worship in another place, but y'all say that ain't the place where we're supposed to worship. So for the Jews in Jerusalem and the surrounding area, for those who wanted to be faithful Jews, it was incumbent, it was put upon them as incumbent that they would have to worship in the temple, that they would have to go to the temple. So in other words, there was the religious aristocracy and elite who began to set the standard that you got to worship at this temple, and you got to come here to Jerusalem to worship at this temple, which means now we are consolidating our ability to profit off of your poverty. And so we see our society is like that, right? Where, wealthy people consolidate so that, whether it's Amazon or whatever, they're the biggest boat on the block. And then you find yourself, these are the ones that get my goods to me. And so we end up then patronizing them, making them even more rich, where they could spread that wealth out so that other businesses, smaller businesses and whatnot, could then begin to grow, and poor people, could have an opportunity at that tree for a bite of that apple. But that's not the way the society is set up, right? So Jesus is condemning a system, y'all. Jesus said they gave from their affluence, but she out of her destitution gave all she had. So what did she have to live on? Nothing. Who came to her rescue? Nobody. Okay, the temple system did not protect the most vulnerable. It exploited them. So Jesus is not condemning religion or worshiping in a church or things like that, but Jesus is condemning any system and any religious institution that is designed to take advantage of the most vulnerable among us. Any institution that does not see its responsibility as protecting the most vulnerable, Jesus is condemning that. Now you begin to get an idea of why, I press so much about what Jesus' expectations are, what his example that he set for us is, and that is to do more for others than we seek to do for ourselves as an organized group religious persons who worship Jesus Christ, our responsibility then is to take care of the most vulnerable. It is to look to take care of those who don't have a voice in this society, to organize ourselves so that we respond to the needs of the most needy in this society. That is what the expectation is. And when a religious institution doesn't do that, now you can see that Jesus has little time to spend on that, and there is a condemnation for that, because it ends up in that religious institution reflects what the society already is, and that is a society that preys, P-R-E-Y-S, on the most vulnerable. So Jesus condemns this religious institution. Jesus condemns the temple. Now, that is why I said we're going to go into Mark 13 because now, if there are any questions, I'll try to address those that I can. In Mark 13, it is a continuation of Mark 12 because it starts out in the first verse, as Jesus was leaving the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what massive stones, what magnificent buildings." And this disciple is looking at the temple and the campus of the temple. So we have churches and schools. You know, they'll have the main building, and then they'll have the campus, and they'll have other buildings. Well, the temple in Jerusalem was similar to that. You know, here you have the temple, and you have other buildings, ornate buildings, and this is the campus of the temple. And the disciple, as he's leaving the temple, he's been in there, he was observing the treasury, he was observing how the scribes, the teachers of the law, are taking advantage of the most poor, getting their wealth from them, and in observing that, he condemns that in his words, but he goes even further to make that condemnation clear, and we see that here in Mark 13. Mark 13, it says, as Jesus was leaving the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what massive stones, what magnificent buildings." And then Jesus said, "Do you see all these great buildings? Not one stone will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down." Okay, so he's leaving the temple. He has just condemned the system in the temple that is taking advantage of a poor widow. Y'all with me so far? He positioned himself so he could see what was going on. And what he saw is something he did not like. He did not appreciate. He did not approve of. He did not approve of the poor being used as profit for the wealthy. And so he condemns that, right? As he's leaving the temple, one of his disciples says, "Look, teacher, what are beautiful buildings. Look at the size of the stone and the cut of the stone, and look at how beautiful this is." The disciples still did not get it. Remember from last week, in particular the male disciples, they just didn't get it. We talked about true worshipers, right? The male disciples just didn't get it. Here they were in the temple, and Jesus, and if you read Mark 12, you'll see that he was dealing with Pharisees and scribes, and it was a battle. It was a back and forth where he was doing spiritual jujitsu on them, but it was still, he was going back and forth, and the disciples are observing this. And so here it is. Thank you, Lori, for that. Thank you so much. We see that the disciples still didn't get it. They're leaving the temple. Look, teacher, how beautiful this building is. The temple was quite impressive, especially to those who lived in rural Palestine. Rural Palestine, it's like living in the suburbs of Chicago. And then, you grow up in the far suburbs of Chicago. You grow up and then you go into the city and you start looking at, the John Hancock building and the old Sears Tower and all of the massive, magnificent buildings and these structures. And it just takes your breath away and blows you away. So the temple in Jerusalem was an impressive temple. The buildings that were around it were just awe-inspiring. It was massive, impressive, and as the late Gardner Taylor said, the golden dome of the temple glistened in the noonday sunlight for miles and miles. People could see the glistening of that golden dome of the temple. But this temple that Mark is referencing as Jesus is coming out, this temple was rebuilt by Herod the Great. The temple had been destroyed, and now it had been rebuilt by Herod the Great. Now, that in itself is a problem, because we know Herod the Great as a wicked puppet king of Rome over Jerusalem. Now, he didn't have much power because Rome gave him the position in the first place. And so in Rome giving him the position, Rome didn't put many checks on him. And so Herod was wicked. We know Herod the Great, he killed hundreds of people. He killed members of his own family that he thought might want to be king like him. And so he was extremely wicked. He was vile, but he built the temple, and he built the temple off of the proceeds from the poverty of poor people, because he orchestrated the tax collectors to collect the money for Rome, and then they would get their cut. So they collected an over amount of taxes from the poor. And so they used this money to build the temple. So why would Herod build the temple? He built the temple for his own benefit, for his own self-aggrandizement, for his own popularity and position. He rebuilt the temple so that he would be seen as a great builder. He didn't rebuild the temple so people could have a place to come and worship God. Yeah, people were going to do that. But he built the temple mainly because he wanted his name to go down in history as the one who rebuilt the temple. He was a politician. And a politician rebuilding the temple is a problem. Oh, no, y'all not hearing me. A politician rebuilding the temple is a problem. Okay? And the problem is seen in how the system in the temple is run. Because Herod, not the chief priests, they were in cahoots with one another because both of them occupied position because of the Roman Empire. Both of them occupied their position because of the emperor in Rome. Both of them were there because of their fealty and their allegiance, not to God, but to Rome. And so Jesus, you see now as I'm talking about Jesus condemning the temple, because from its foundation and what was the intention of those who rebuilt it, it was not to honor God. Jesus responds again, do you see the great buildings? Not one stone will be left upon the other. All will be thrown down. Now, as a matter of historical fact, that temple later on did get destroyed, but it got destroyed by fire. And we're going to talk more about that. We'll probably get more into that on next week. However, Jesus in saying that this is going to be obliterated. Okay? So the disciples are fascinated with it. The disciples see it, as a great architectural example of human ingenuity, and in some wistful way they see that God, must have had God's hand in it. Now, God has God's hand in everything, but this temple was built not to honor God, but to take advantage of the people, y'all. And so this is a religious institution that is being used by people to hurt people, okay? And Jesus is not pleased with that, and so he condemns that. And so his proclamation is even deeper than that. According to the religious elite and political aristocracy of Jerusalem, the temple was the sole place of worship. Hear me now. In other words, their teaching would be spread out. They inculcated in the people that you really didn't worship God unless you worship God in the temple. Now that's different from the African way of being with God and being in the community of people. And so we talked about Sunday how, being in this pandemic, it robbed us of coming together and worshiping God together. Now, we recognize that you can worship God anywhere, but it's something special about worshiping God together, right? Well, according to the religious elite and the political aristocracy of Jerusalem, you weren't in good standing with God if you didn't worship in the temple. That's different, and that's a lie, okay? The temple was organized and facilitated by people in high political positions, and that position was given to them by Rome, not by God, and Rome did not care for the needs of the most vulnerable. And so Rome and the religious elite of Jesus' day didn't really care about people. The high priests, the scribes, the Pharisees, they were all, and Sadducees, they were all in bed with the Roman aristocracy. And being in bed with the Roman aristocracy, they were seeking profit for their own selves and position for their own selves. The temple had become a place for the adulation and adoration of the religious elite and a place of profiting off of the pain and poverty of the poor. The temple had become a nefarious system, a tool that served the will of the Roman Empire and its oppression of the black people of Palestine. And Herod and the scribes were black people who were in cahoots with the white oppressors from Rome. Thus, the temple system, not religion or in particular the building itself, had to be condemned, not restored. Jesus is saying that you can't even restore this. This has to be torn down and something new built in its place. It cannot be restored. It had to be removed so that God's new system of religious practice and life could be initiated. But before that could happen, it had to be torn down. So a system had to be torn down, and the temple represented that system. It wasn't that the temple itself was bad. It was how it had been used. And so because of the way it had been used, it had to be torn down so that something new could be built up, y'all. And so as we think about this, what Jesus is predicting, the pandemic that we have been in, it has served to discombobulate people today who traditionally attend church but who fail to adhere to and adore Jesus as Lord. So there are people that come to church to network, people that come to church to get a date, to get a husband, to get a wife. That's not why you come to church. You don't come to church to get a spouse, to get a boo or a bae, and you don't come to church to network. But that's what a lot of people in this American culture have utilized what we call worship. It is symbolic over substance. Symbolic means I go to church. And why do you go to church? Well, in reality, I go to church because I'm trying to see what I can get. Substance means I go to church so that I can be transformed by the Spirit of God working through me. Okay? The pandemic has forced many of us to see that the building is a place to be refueled for the work of Jesus and not a place to be fed and have our ego stroked. The pandemic has challenged us, okay? Jesus is saying that the temple has to be torn down. Well, what will people do? They'll have to learn to then rethink how you saw church in the first place or the temple then. And so the pandemic, in some ways, has reflected what Jesus was pointing out. Pandemic has forced many people to see the building as a place to now see the building as a place to be refueled and not a place where you come to get fed, a place to be refueled to do the work of Jesus and not a place to be fed and have your ego stroked. Everybody, well, not everybody, a lot of people come to church because they want to be on program. People come to church because they want their names called. Oh, my goodness. If we can't call everybody's name on the prayer list, there's somebody that's not going to be happy. Well, we can't call everybody's name on the prayer list. No church can do that because any church's prayer list is more numerous than you have time to call all those names. So you call a few names. Well, why didn't you call so-and-so's name? Well, why not? What's wrong with the names we call? I'm just saying, I'm using that as an example. Every church has to go through this because we live in a society that has conditioned us to see church like we see everywhere else as a place to come and have ego stroked. And the pandemic has challenged that, y'all, where we now have to rethink that and come to church because we seek to serve those who are most in need in the community around us. Let me tell you something. There are a lot of churches across America and a lot of churches that are in areas of poverty, and I'm not talking about the pastor, I'm talking about members of the church who drive away in Lexuses and Bentleys and all of that stuff, but that particular building has been in that place for such a long time, and the church has not done much to affect the economic situation of the poor in the community it sits in. It's just a building in the community, and the people in the community don't go to the church, and many times people drive to the church from outside the community and never do what Jesus did to minister to the people in the community. That's all across America, and that is an affront to the ministry of Jesus Christ. The pandemic has challenged people who claim to be followers of Jesus to either seek a real walk with Jesus or do what they really want, and that is strive for being valued through gaining position and privilege. The pandemic is challenging us to seek a real walk with Jesus, as Alan Buzak of South Africa has said, to walk where Jesus walked. The pandemic is sifting out those who Jesus said are true worshipers, those who worship God in spirit and in truth. And so Jesus was saying that the temple would have to be torn down. He said not one stone is going to be left upon the other. And so, and in doing that, it wasn't that the building was bad and people shouldn't come together to worship. Jesus wants that, wants people to come together to worship, but he doesn't want people coming together to worship, the so-called worship him, when in reality, they are trying to be more like the society around them, and they end up flaunting their privilege and their prosperity in front of people who are in poverty. And so Jesus expects those who come together to worship him to make a system where everybody can be valued, and that the most vulnerable, those who live in the community around you, can benefit, and never, and not that they have to become a member of the church, but that they would be touched by the hands of Jesus through you. That's what church is. That's what Jesus is expecting from the people that follow him. And so he said that temple where the Pharisees and the high priests and the teachers of the law, they said this is the only place you can worship and be in right relationship with God. Now that's a lie, but that's what they were saying, and it was influencing people, okay? And so Jesus said, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to tear the whole thing down. The whole thing going to be torn down. Now what you going to do? Now you got to get a real relationship with God, because trouble drives you to God. I don't know who I'm talking to out there, but anybody ever been in a situation where you had trouble get on your heels and trouble get in your life? You then found out that I got to be real when I come to God, that I got to really hear from God, that I got to stop putting on superficial air, and I got to start getting right with God, that I know the stuff that I need to change in my life, and I need to start changing those things. Trouble will force you to draw you nearer to God. That's what that's what happened during the pandemic. Many people who had to isolate themselves, and they had to quarantine and had to socially distance in their own homes, and who couldn't get out to the church because we couldn't come to church. The pandemic was raging, and you had to sit in the house by yourself with yourself. Or you had to be in the house with your spouse, and you normally would be going to work, and now y'all got to sit there together, and it wasn't pleasant, was it? It was a challenge, because now you couldn't rely on the distractions to distract you from a real relationship with God. And so you had to do a lot of praying during the pandemic. You had to do a lot of getting on your knees. You had to do a lot of reading of the scriptures. You had to do a lot of soul searching, because you needed that to help you have hope, to have some expectation that God is going to get us through this. Trouble will help you do that, y'all. And Jesus is pointing out that this temple going to have to be destroyed, because that will drive people to want to have a real relationship with God. And then you rebuild. And we see that beginning of that in the Acts of the Apostles. Now, Jesus in Mark 13, starting with that third verse, and we're going to shut it down. We're going to finish up next week. Mark says, as Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, tell us, when will these things happen, and what will be the sign that they are about to be fulfilled? Now, the disciples, now this is a common thing of teaching in the Gospels. You see something happen. Jesus says some words. The disciples don't get it. They don't understand it. Not one stone is going to be left upon the other. What is he talking about? And so then they get Jesus by himself, and they privately say, okay, what's the deal? When will these things happen? What will be the sign? Okay? And then Jesus preaches a sermon. Now, the sermon is a long sermon. Y'all don't like long sermons. I know for a fact y'all don't like long sermons. But Jesus preached long sermons. And so he preaches a sermon. Now, what I want to lay in closing is this. And then we're going to look at the sermon, at least part of it, on next week. Because it all goes into what he's talking about. And when he says this temple has got to be destroyed. He's talking about a system has to be destroyed. So the background is this, and I know we don't usually get the background. This is the Gospel of Mark. When was it written? It was written somewhere around 69 A.D. 69 A.D. This is about 69 years after Jesus ascended into heaven. 69 A.D. when Mark sat down to write his gospel. What was going on in the life of Mark and in the life of the people that read this gospel letter of Mark? What was going on during that time? Well, from 66 A.D. to 70 A.D. was something called the Roman-Jewish War. From 66 A.D., from June 66 A.D. to April 70 A.D., the Roman-Jewish War. What are you saying? That the zealots, the revolutionaries in Jerusalem, the Jewish revolutionaries, had organized themselves for a violent rebellion against Rome in June of 66 A.D. In November of 66 A.D., the Roman legate Cestus Gallus marched with his soldiers to put down the Jewish rebellion. But the Jewish rebellion, the revolutionaries, the guerrilla fighters were so strong at this moment, they turned the Roman legate Cestus Gallus back. And he went back because he wasn't able to put down the rebellion. Jerusalem, for the first time in centuries, was liberated. The zealots, the revolutionaries liberated Jerusalem for a short time. But they liberated. They were outnumbered. They were out-weaponed. And against all odds, they liberated Jerusalem from the Roman control. Vespasian, the military leader, this is before he became emperor, he was a military leader. He was then dispatched to put down the rebellion and take back Jerusalem for Rome. He marched and retook the surrounding areas around Jerusalem with his legions of soldiers. You know how many soldiers he had? He had 6,000 heavily armed troops. Go back to Mark 5, where Jesus comes upon a deranged man, and he runs up to Jesus, and the demons in him speak out. What are you going to do with us, Jesus? Son of David, we know who you are. And Jesus says to them, what is your name? And the demons in him say, my name is Legion, for we are many. A legion of Roman soldiers were 6,000 soldiers. There is some continuity in this Gospel of Mark that I really hope you are getting. Vespasian marched toward Jerusalem with 6,000 Roman soldiers, and they retook the outlying areas. In June of 68 A.D., he then turned his sights on Jerusalem he was going to then retake Jerusalem. However, his siege was abated. It was aborted, rather, because of the death of Emperor Nero. When the death of Emperor Nero happened, there were 4 people vying to be emperor, and Rome was in some upheaval. So Vespasian had been summoned back to Rome to help get things together. The Jewish resistance in Jerusalem was ecstatic, and they kept saying, God has intervened. For almost a year and a half, Jerusalem remained free. They thought God had stepped in. But Vespasian prevailed in Rome, became the next emperor, and then he sent his general Titus to finish off the rebels in Jerusalem in April of 70 A.D. After 5 months of battle, Jerusalem fell back to Rome, the city was sacked, and the temple was burned to the ground. During Mark's time of writing, before Rome's final victory over Jerusalem, the Jewish revolutionaries, in organizing to fight the Roman soldiers, they went through Jerusalem and the outlying areas telling the people, if you are a true Jew, you have to join the battle to violently turn back Rome, because David's restoration that was prophesied is now. This is the messianic battle that we have been looking for. And God wants us to violently take this back. You have to join us to defend Jerusalem. Now, this is where we're going to stop and pick it up tomorrow, because I need you to think about these questions. Jesus led a nonviolent movement. Jesus led a nonviolent movement against the religious system of his own people and against the empire of Rome. So do the followers of Jesus then join the violent uprising? Is patriotism to Jerusalem the priority that following Jesus called for? The disciples in Mark's gospel turned to Jesus for clarity. We're going to turn to Jesus next week and look at what he said to give us clarity on what the followers of Jesus in the first century should have done. Give us some idea of how we have to deal, how we are called to deal with unjust systems today. All right? So once again, I hope it has been helpful. I really appreciate you all tuning in tonight, and I thank you for your patience. We got this thing right tonight. So thank you all for joining in. Thank you all for being, a part of this class tonight. I kind of like this setup. So I thank Mike Carson for his diligence in trying to get this technology right. And so on next Tuesday, thank you so much. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. I hope it is beneficial, because I know it's going counter to, what we normally expect, to kind of be shouted, and I'm not looking to give us a shout. I'm trying to give us, some substance so we'll understand the ministry of Jesus Christ. And so I thank you all for joining in. And with that, we'll see you on next Tuesday. And for those of you who join us in prayer on Wednesday morning at 5:45 a.m., ask that you will join us in prayer 5:45 tomorrow morning, and then I look forward to seeing you on Sunday. It's my pastoral anniversary, and I really love to see you either in person. I really love to see you in person. But if you sign in, on our YouTube and Facebook page for service on Sunday, I'll get a chance to see you that way, and I really would appreciate it. It would do my heart good. So thank you all so much. And so God bless you, and see you on next week. Again, thank you, Big Mike. You outdid yourself. And so God bless you and God keep you.